What's up guys, Dan here, Coalcracker. Today we're going to be talking about how to start and stop a stitch line when we are fixing gear or making gear and we're using a sewing method. So this is one of the most confusing things that I hear when we do a sewing project at any of our courses, and that is people are a little bit confused how to start the stitch and then how to end it so it doesn't fall apart. Because here's the thing, most of the projects that you're going to do or repairs that you're going to make, or obviously, especially the repairs, are a stress point. That's why the stitching blew out to begin with. So you have to know how to start and stop the stitch so it's very, very strong, and that's what I'm going to show you today. It's easy stuff that once you get that tool in the toolbox, you'll be good pretty much forever to go. All right, so before we get into it, we're just going to be using a basic straight needle and some thread. When you're choosing thread for your kit or projects for the outdoors, we preferably want to try to stay with a polyester thread. It's going to hold up better and be more rot resistant. Second in line there, nylon thread, and then last but not least, cotton. That's probably the worst thread you can use in outdoor type projects, just because it's going to rot and break a lot easier. So remember, we're dealing with heavier duty products here, wool, canvas, leather, so stuff like that you got to use the appropriate threads for. Now when you're threading a needle, all right, because this is a little bit of confusion for people, so of course we all know that the thread goes through the needle. An easy way, because there's all different size needles, to understand if the needle in thread are the appropriate size proportion for each other, is that when you put your thread through the needle should slide freely down. You see how that's sliding down? It's sliding down when I hold it at an angle, the thread, without getting hung up. Okay, if it does that, you're okay to go. All right. The next thing is, a lot of people I've been noticing at courses, we tell them, hey, thread the needle, so we're going to start sewing, is that they are taking the end here and they're putting a knot on it. This end, the tag end, it always just stays open. So you just leave it, it's literally just like that. So while you're sewing, you do have to be cautious that this thing doesn't pull back through. It's not the end of the world, you have to just rethread the needle, but that end just hangs like that. So I leave 3-4 inches. You can leave a little bit more. If there's too much hanging off, not the best then, because it starts getting all tangled up. Okay, so there's two categories of stitches, the running and the whip stitch, all right, and there's variations to both of those. So a whip stitch, think of a tornado, basically goes around the edge of material. It wraps around like a spring. A running stitch goes in and out of material. When you think about like a sewing machine per se, it goes in and it's a nice straight line. It's not going around the outside this way. Okay, so let's start with a whip stitch. It's the least used because it's a little bit weaker and there's a little bit of exposure to it compared to a running stitch. So let's just go over the whip stitch though, because it is useful to know how to do that. Now, in I don't want to say old times, but like my grandparents, when my grandmothers were showing me some sewing stuff, they would always say, you go to the end of your thread, not this end, but the other end, okay, and you tie a knot there, and that's your starting point, is that knot. The biggest problem I find with that, when I do that, is that because of the types of materials we're working with, it leaves a very weak point. That knot can pull through, especially fabrics like wool, because of the weave. It can pull through really easily, and it's not the best to do. So this is what I do. I always start a whip stitch like this. I'll run it through my piece, and I bring it through until I have just about an inch or two of thread at the end, and then all that I do is I just put a knot, okay, an overhand knot into my thread. I pull that nice and tight. You can use a surgeon's knot too. That will work really good, but you pull that nice and tight, and now we are good to go, okay? So that is way stronger than a single knot just laying against the outside. And now at this point, I could begin my whips, which I'll show you a quick whip stitch, because we're gonna show you how to finish this off while we're on this one. So I'm gonna pull this around. You do this a couple times just to show you what we have happening here. I'm going to come back here. Now, here's another thing with polyester thread, which we're going to talk about when we get to the end. These tails, okay, you can cut these. You leave about 1/4 inch and then burn them. And they're going to melt because they're plastic, but that melted plastic is going to bond with the other thread. You mush it down with your finger, and then guess what? You really have a nice sealed, locked in starting point or ending point, as you're going to see here in a second. So we don't want that underneath there. So you can see a whip stitch, we're just whipping around. All right, it's a very quick stitch to sew. So this is what I do to finish this off. I will just go back in my whip hole like this, and I'm going to go around 3 or 4 times around the edge. 1, 2, and again, the more time you take with this, the nicer and neater you can make it. This is a little bit sloppy, which I'm embarrassed about, but it's getting the point across, right? So I'm gonna go around like 3 times, just like that. I'm still out the top. Now I'm just gonna take this and go through my 3 stitches, and then that little hole we have left, I'm gonna tuck it in and give it a pull. Now, I can pick this out with my fingers because it's not locked in yet, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna trim this, and then I would get a lighter and give it a burn. As that burns, it's gonna melt, smush it in on both sides, and then it's gonna be nice and locked in place. So that's a really easy way to end that whip stitch, and it's gonna be a lot stronger than simply just putting a single knot. Now, the next thing that we're gonna be focusing on is our running stitch. So there's a running stitch, a saddle stitch, all this good stuff. So all that stitch looks like is you're going to go in the top side and then in the bottom side, in the top side, in the bottom side, and then you get this effect here that your thread is running through your material. Now, you can also make this a saddle stitch by going back through the holes and closing all of this in, okay? So, in our case, what I like to do here is I just run, if I was doing just a simple running stitch, would look like this. I will then take my needle and I'll begin to make a saddle stitch, which means closes in these gaps. So I'm gonna take my needle, I'm gonna go back in, and back out. So you see how now we have that and it's locked in from underneath. I'm going to do that again. In here, out here. Okay. And then I would just do that for about 4 to 5 stitches back. And then once you do that, I'm going to come back down this way one more time. So I'm just going to come in and run my stitch back down. I want to get it somewhat close there for everybody. So I run my stitch back down. All right, and now what that's going to do when I get to the end is our thread line came down, it went back, and now it came forward. That is locking our stitch in place. For this stitch to come out now, when I cut this, okay, and burn it, the burnt end would have to go through both layers and then pull through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 holes before we got down to the base stitch. So that's how I like to end when I'm hand sewing my running stitch. If you're doing a saddle stitch, I do the same thing. So I ran down, I have this set up the same way, and you close it in, it's going to look like a saddle stitch when it's done, just not as sloppy, hopefully. Now, that beginning portion, okay, I do the same thing. So if this was the beginning portion and I was doing a simple running stitch with gaps, I would then just make it a saddle stitch down and a saddle stitch back, cut it and burn it, and I would be good to go. So very simplistic here. Not a lot of knot tying, more tying knots here on the running stitch, but when it comes to the running style stitch, this stitch for sure is going to be well strong enough by just hand back stitching it, and you will be good to go. So there you go, sewing lesson with Dan. Listen, it is definitely an important thing to know how to repair your gear and even make gear as a bushcrafter or survivalist or in a self-reliant type situation. Very, very good skill to have to be able to fix your stuff, because I'll tell you, when you're out and something rips or breaks or pops, shelters or backpacks, to be able to fix that stuff on the fly is great, okay? So practice this stuff at home though, because it's a little bit of muscle memory, and once you get it and you understand how the stitches go together, give them a tug, give them a pull, and you will be golden. All right, so I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit like and subscribe down below. You can also check us out at coalcrackerbushcraft.com for all our classes, our gear, and our blog. And then until the next video, stay in the woods.